So, welcome to this session of Speak Your Mind by Climb Mobilize. And my guest this time is Trish McOrmond. Trish, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to see this sort of collection of people talking about things that matter.
Oh, it's been super interesting, and we have so many amazing speakers lined up. And I'm really psyched that even though we've only met very recently, here we are, and we have this great connection. So Trish is going to be speaking about the topic of why has declaring climate emergencies failed to create meaningful change. And Trish, I'd like to start by asking you a question or maybe
Mhm.
making a statement and then letting you take it from there, which is that people may not know, but there are already millions of people all around the world who are covered by declarations of a climate emergency. And yet, despite that, we're not seeing the kind of change we would hope to be seeing. So why do you think that is?
I think there are three really important reasons. The first is the biggest. Emergency implies heroic measures for a short period of time. When we think of a flood or a fire, there is immediate, clear action. Get people out of the water, put people out, like put the fire out. But emergencies and creeping change, creeping disasters, creeping cataclysms, there's no sort of clear put the fire out action that we can take. So emergency, which is about heroism and immediate action, gets lost. And we don't have a construct of emergency that's about a long-term thing. Think about hospitals, emergency rooms, fast, critical, active, get them into long-term care or get them out. Emergencies, we think about this, our mental model is that it's fast. The second is right now, so much of what we're doing is either an emergency or a war. We have a war on terror, we have a war on poverty, we have actual horrible war, we have a war on drugs, we have mental health emergencies, we have climate emergency, we have all of the emergencies. So it becomes overwhelming. And when we think about this on an individual level, we have what's called a window of tolerance or a window of capacity, which is how much our nervous system can accommodate. As communities and as cultures, we have the same thing. We have a window of capacity in terms of how much can be absorbed before it just becomes overwhelming and we shut down. And the third is, I think, probably the easiest to start to address. We don't know what we're building toward. Everything is an emergency or a war, but what's the alternative? And it's not about protopia. It's not about utopia. It's about this idea of protopia or ustopia. There's a number of different ideas, but this idea about how do we start to build a human and nature future? Because if we're talking about emergencies, we're not talking about where we're going. And in emergencies, one of the things that's really critical is the emergency management spectrum goes from immediate response to recovery, long-term recovery, but there's also this prevention and mitigation and preparedness phase that we don't talk about when we talk about emergencies. And that's the piece where the hope gets built.
Interesting. You mentioned the hope. In one of the previous speakers also has addressed the need for hope, that personal hope. So if we look at that, what you just said, basically, what does that mean in terms of the mental well-being? Because we're going to have mental well-being for the long haul, whereas addressing, these immediate emergencies is kind of a mobilization of energy at that specific time period, and then we can go back to where we were. What about long-term mental well-being?
Mhm. Well, being told that we're constantly in a state of emergency and war, it erodes our mental well-being. So increasingly, our ability to make well thought out decisions is decreasing. Just like in humans, like individual humans, when we are stressed, our brain fills up with stress hormones. Essentially, our ability to make good decisions is short circuited because we're concerned about survival. And when that happens, I don't know if people are familiar with the book by Daniel Kahneman, Fast Thinking, Slow Thinking, Slow Thinking, Fast Thinking. We go to our default. We think fast. We're like, what do we need to do to survive? Because survival becomes our primary motivation. That's not engaging imagination. That's not engaging innovation. That's not encouraging us to sort of think broadly about what it is we're going to. All we're trying to do is escape. So our mental well-being is completely undermined. I see it in my kids. I see it in when I go to the stores and I talk to the clerks who work there. I see it everywhere. People are exhausted because we're constantly being told about what we're working against. We have nothing that unifies us. We have nothing, and we're community animals. We're pack animals. What's going to bring us together? How do we get united? What is the language of community? And what is the healing that we need to do so that we can find ways to address this collectively? We tell each other that none of us are meant to do this alone. It takes a village to raise a child. But healing also requires all of us. And what's going on in our world is about healing. It's emergencies are caused when we are not prepared for what happens. And a physical emergency and a mental emergency aren't the same thing. And what we have created by trying to address something quickly is a long-term mental health disaster. And it's being worsened by a language that is always about what we're going to lose and about what can't be anymore, as opposed to what we could build. We've lost possibilities.
So we've lost possibilities. It's interesting you're looking at this from the perspective of time. Um, Other perspectives that have been introduced have been on location. Do we try to address this globally, or is this a matter of scale and scope of community, even at the individual level? You're saying, well, there's an additional element. It's that fourth dimension of time. There's the immediacy of an emergency, but there's that long-term slog in the marathon, and there's the importance of keeping our mental well-being in place communitively, as a community to be able to address it. So then, what does that then mean about our ability to think about change, and therefore how we would be planning? Maybe you have examples that you'd like to bring in.
I think our ability to think about change is hampered by two things. One, this idea that we can control the future, which is deeply grounded in colonialism, and this idea that everything can be an externality to satisfying a want. Because colonialism for years has been able to travel and leave behind their mess for someone else to clean up. There's nowhere left to go. And so colonialism has come home. And all of us need to accept that what Indigenous people, what the Global South has been talking about for the last 200 years is now sitting right now. Like, this is our backyard. We in Canada, in the global north, or however you want to say it, and the people that have been greedy, we need to address that. And I want to make it really clear. I am Métis, and I work with First Nations and Métis, so Indigenous populations in Canada. When I talk about inequities, the inequities within our own nations are really clear. I work on reserve. There are no fire hydrants in communities of 6,000 people. So this already exists at home, and we have just collectively ignored it. And now we can't, because it's the desire to extract has come home to everybody. So when I think about what it means to have an example in World War I and World War II, but I'm going to think about World War II particularly. We had in Canada something called Victory Gardens. And Victory Gardens were a way to address food security because of the war. And people were growing their own vegetables. And in Edmonton, in our river valley, there were huge plots that were planted as Victory Gardens. And we can still walk there and look at, most of it's gone now, but we can see the old plots. And it was this idea that collectively we can come together to reduce the burden on what keeps us alive. And right now it's our mother that keeps us alive. So if we are declaring an emergency, we don't have anything to do except be heroic. But if we're declaring um, a peaceful future, if we're talking about building human-sized environments where our kids can thrive, because our kids are not thriving right now. If we're talking about building a future where we have an opportunity to sit and rest and not constantly hate ourselves, which I think is another byproduct of emergency everything, then it allows us to build something beautiful. And the Victory Gardens show that these were sustained for years because we had a collective vision about what we were building. We were building a safer future for our kids. We were building a stance of justice and love and prosperity for people over hate and fear and greed. And it's interesting to me that what we're trying to do is the same as what the Victory Gardens were trying to do, but we're trying to do it from a place of anger as opposed to coming at it from a place of, hey, I love my earth. I love my kids so much that I am willing to make these changes. And these changes are going to need to be navigated. And so I am willing to figure out how to navigate them and accept that this is going to be heavy work. But when we're constantly told, make a vision board and buy a new car, and you're supposed to feel good all the time, and oh, here's a Prozac, the heavy work becomes even heavier because we think we're supposed to feel good while we do it. You don't feel good when you do this because it's really hard. I feel good after. It's the hope.
So the emphasis has to be on the process. It's on not this. It's not the immediate return, which often is the expectation. Which also kind of makes sense because when we think about declaring a climate emergency, that mechanism is intended to mobilize resources. We're going to war, and it has to be done by the politicians who are thinking from term to term. You're saying, no, we need to get out of that mindset, and we have to, first of all, do it out of a good place, a place of hope instead of a place of anger. But it also has to take a much longer time perspective, although obviously at this late stage in the game, there is urgency that has to be taken into account, right? If this was 20, 30 years ago, then that's one thing. But I think that now there's this increasing urgency and sense of stress, like from season to season, we're hearing more, we're seeing more, we're beginning to feel it more and more.
Yeah.
So I guess these dissonances that we have difficulty addressing, and maybe that comes back to the mental side of things. How do we cope mentally?
Right, because our bodies know. So you and I were talking at the beginning about what the weather is like here in Edmonton. So it's the beginning of January. Usually it's been cold for a number of, well, 6 or 8 weeks by now. But New Year's Day, it was 6 or 7 above here. Today it's negative 33. And this is in Celsius, and this is absolute temperature, like not with wind chill or anything. So our bodies are attuned to the way the earth used to move. And so our bodies are, we don't consciously, we're not aware of it, but our bodies are experiencing this, what the heck is going on stuff. We're tireder. Food is like, it's harder to eat for a lot of people. Our bodies are manifesting what needs to happen. So one of the things that I use a lot, going back to the work and the process, and I'm going to paraphrase this, and I'm probably going to get it mostly wrong, so please, everybody, forgive me if I do, but this is how I see it. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is a warrior, and he fought for Krishna, and he did really amazing things, and then he was like well rewarded. A few years go by, and Krishna comes to Arjuna, and he's like, "Hey, dude, there's a war. I need you to come fight." And yes, this is a battle metaphor, so forgive me that piece, but it's this piece that matters. Arjuna says, well, what about my great life and my beautiful house? I don't want to give that up. And Krishna says to Arjuna, well, you have to. Like, you're here to do this work. And Arjuna says, well, okay, I'll give it up, but I want to make sure that when I come home, my house and my kids and my wife and my beautiful everything is still here. And Krishna says to Arjuna, you are not here for the reward. You are here for the work. The work is what matters. So we don't do this because we know it's going to turn out okay. We don't do this because everything is going to be great. We do this because the alternative is to not do it. And hope lies in the doing.
Lot to process there. The hope lies in the doing. Um, yeah, I guess I can understand that. What do they say about what's the term that I'm looking for? When people are inactive and they're not doing anything, that's when you start having problem. Keeping busy, but you're saying, but to be doing something meaningful, not just to be doing for the sake of doing.
And if it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Like, let's stop pretending we're going to manufacture a perfect solution and just start doing things. And if we start doing them badly, eventually we'll get good at them. I'm learning how to play piano. I suck, like really, really bad. I am 52. I am learning how to play piano. My kids laugh at me all the time. But I am better now than I was 6 months ago.
Yeah, you keep
So if I want
practicing.
to learn how to play piano, I have to be really, really, really bad before I'm ever going to be any good.
In
It's
today's
the same
society
with
that we seem
this.
in today's society we seem to be running out of patience. But I think that's a very good point that people need to kind of stop, realize it's okay. This is going to take time, and then that releases some of the stress. Trish, this has been super interesting, especially this focus on that fourth dimension of time. That's not something that I've heard very much about in the past. As we come to the end of this, if there's one thought that you would like to leave with the audience, what would it be? What's your message of hope or recommendation or whatever the case may be?
Um, my message of hope is that there is so much love and good in this world. And it is really easy to find when we open our hearts up to it. Because our earth is constantly taking care of us. So my message is this: if we can rise to the challenge, our mother will rise with us. This is not us alone. This is us together with our Mother Earth, our plants. Like, this isn't something we have to have victory over. This is something we build collectively.
In some cases, it almost seems like we would be better off putting our time into getting out of the way instead of
Yeah.
trying to dominate and determine uh, what the output should look like. Trish,
That's a
this is
really good point. I'd like to add that. Thank you.
sure.
If we listen to our mother, she will show us. And there's Indigenous teachings all around about how we can listen to our mother and actually work with her to heal everything that I mean, it's going to take centuries, but we can start it.
I think, yeah, taking that first step. Well, I guess there are people who have already been taking that first step.
Yeah.
Collectively, we need more mobilization to do that. Trish, look, I really want to thank you again. This has been very interesting. Another perspective that I think we can add to the toolbox of perspectives that we've been hearing as part of this series. So again, thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to us staying in contact during this coming year. There's so much to do. There's so much being planned, and it has
Yeah.
to be done together, like you said.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ian. And you and Brad, I really appreciate that you guys are starting to that you're pulling so many different ways of thinking together. There isn't just one way to do this.
No,
So
absolutely.
thank you.
There definitely is a plurality of ways of doing it. Thank you again, and we look forward to maybe you'll join us for the next
Yeah.
session that we have as well. That'd be great.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you very
Be
much, Trish.
nice. Well, be kind.